Cabinet Room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
On September 3rd, 1939, Britain and France declared war on Germany, enacting the Second World War. As with many wars, supplies and troops were needed on the front lines, and the safety of the people must be secure in an efficient manner. Trains were the solution, with a larger capacity to carry than any other vehicle at the time. As well as carrying on the usual freight traffic, they also were tackled with transporting the supplies of war and troop trains, on top of keeping up with their regular services. Without the railway, the supplies and troops of the war would have been transported at a slower rate, which would have impacted the result at the end of World War II. That said, the railways had a large effect on the outcome of the war, especially for the Allied forces.
In the United Kingdom, things practically changed overnight, from a peaceful railway run by 4 companies to then a complicated wartime system run by the government. Supplies and troops needed to be moved across the country to the front lines near the English Channel. Locomotives in the service varied at the time. There are different services to be fulfilled, such as express passenger, express goods, mixed traffic, heavy goods, shunters, etc. Locomotives like the A3 were entrusted with keeping express trains running. The LMS 8Fs were designed for the heavy freight services of regular supplies. The Leslie Hawthorne 040 saddle tanks put together trains as shunters at the Falmouth docks. There are also the heavy war supplies pulled by the railway operating division's locomotives that flipped the railway schedule on its head. The railway's traffic increased day by day. Eventually, railway work was so important, it was considered a reserved occupation, meaning that people in the occupation were excused from going to war. Regular passenger trains were reduced, so the passenger locomotives were practically pushed onto the troop trains and wartime freight. This served as a problem because locomotives suffered a lack of servicing and maintenance. However, it was an absolute necessity to constantly keep these trains running to transport supplies all throughout Britain, so there was never any time for it. Troop trains were one of the most efficient ways to get army personnel and supplies up to the front lines in the English Channel. Heavy wartime supplies from the railway operating division like tanks, planes, and trucks used well wagons and other wartime flatbeds to transport vehicles to the English Channel in preparation for D-Day. These trains were prioritized on the railway over any other train as they needed to get to the front lines as soon as possible. Railways then began asking to civilians, "Is your journey really necessary?" or "Food, shells, and fuel must come first. Do you mind?" Ronald H., a World War II fireman who retired in 1982, said, "The too few passenger trains were heavily loaded. They were always full to the bursting point, with corridors of sleeping forces personnel. The scheduling of the railway became more and more sporadic and unplanned. Something like the Dunkirk evacuation in 1941 saw about 620 unscheduled trains of injured soldiers coming through without being on the schedule. Trains on the timetable were shunted for these medevac trains. Special trains were seen increasing into 1942, and even more so as D-Day approached. These trains were extremely important to the war effort. Unfortunately, the Axis also knew this and began to attack the industrial sites, the docks, warehouses, and most importantly, the railway. On September 7, 1940, Germany started bombing Britain's main cities in an effort to slow down supplies and troops from getting to the front lines. This historical event was known as the Blitz, which went from September 7th, 1940 to May 11th, 1941. Throughout that time, air raids became more and more common. Posters were put up saying, "Mothers, send them out of London," with a picture of 2 children as a suggestion to evacuate the children out of populated cities and into rural Britain. Children were evacuated to the countryside in some 3,000 trains full of children. Railway crews had to cover up their cabs to make sure the fire's light didn't give away their position, and railway staff were given gas masks so trains could be kept moving, no matter how deadly the situation may get. When the bombs started to drop, trains were stopped under structures to wait for the Nazi bombers to retreat. The most dangerous place to be during the bombings were the railway yards. As Ronald H. had put it, "Believe me, it was the most unsafe place to be, especially after nightfall. We lost many men down there." But however many people died, or however dangerous the threat of being bombed was, trains were still kept moving throughout the railways. Thanks to the railways, supplies came through without much of a hitch.
On September 2nd, 1945, the horrific war had ended. There were many reasons to why the Axis surrendered, but the efficiency of the Allied forces' railways was one of the most relevant. The reliability of these railways was never questioned, but after their contribution to the war, it was known for certain that railways' reliability would never waver through storms, floods, wars, or even the Blitz.